webinar, Open Access to Gurus, Tony and Scott. So each question you submit will receive, like I say, 2 or 3 perspectives. We do have great questions coming in now, but there's still room for a few more, so just enter your questions into the text field of the webinar panel. I'll be pleased to read them for myself, Tony, or Scott to respond. So let's start with our first live question, then I'll go to some of the ones from the registration. Kim, who's with us today, asks whether we use logistic regression. And I'll start this off with a quick phrase from Einstein, who I believe said, use the most simplistic solution that you can to the problem and nothing more complex. I know that's not exactly how he phrased it, but that's certainly the intent. And absolutely, logistic regression is used very commonly. Let me start with Scott to comment on how and when to consider logistic regression, as well as other modeling methods in general. Scott? Oh, Scott, my apology. I had you muted. Okay, you should be live now. Sorry.
Well, you won't let me talk. Okay. Okay. That's a good question. That's a very good question. From a high level, logistic regression is most often used legitimately for a classification type of problem. But really, the way I guess I'd answer that is, if you don't learn how to use logistic regression, it will use you. And what I mean by that is that certainly, like I said, you can use it for a classification application. However, you really need to study its strengths and weaknesses and understand when it works best and its limitations. Else you'll get into a problem. One thing that we've mentioned is that you can, with any algorithmic approach, you can throw data into an algorithm and you'll always get results on the other end. The quality of those results, if you don't prepare the data and understand how to apply the algorithm to solve the problem, you'll get a commensurate results. If you just throw data in, you're going to get something out, and it's probably like 99.9% going to fail. But logistic regression is a classification type of application. It comes from the category of linear types of algorithms, similar to linear regression. It has the same types of strengths and weaknesses.
Great consideration, Scott. Thank you for that. And on occasion we'll have some fairly technical questions, and it's not as though we don't understand the mechanics of the more sophisticated machine learning technologies. If somebody wants to ask us about the the sigmoid transfer function in the hidden layer node of a neural network, we can certainly explain it. But at the end of the day, I know Tony will argue, where does it get you in really having lift to the business problem itself. Tony, would you like to expand on Kim's question about the use of logistic regression and other methods selected for model building? And Tony, I can see I do not have you muted, and you are unmuted on your side, but we're not getting your audio. And it looks like you're still actively connected.
Yeah, I am. Can you hear me now?
Great. We can.
Okay. Sorry, apparently I'm having a problem with my headset because I just unplugged it. So you got me through the computer at this point.
Okay.
I apologize for quality issues. But anyway, Kim, yes, I use logistic regression on a regular basis as a candidate algorithm for a lot of my projects. As I was discussing during the presentation, I tend to work with the tails of the distribution and be modeling a specific behavior, therefore dealing and conceptualizing my projects, at least starting out, as classification problems. And in general, logistic regression, along with things like CHAID and CART and decision trees and other tools are good algorithms because we tend to be appropriately matching their capabilities with the conceptualization of the project. And as Scott was saying, I think that's the real key to making any algorithm work, is making sure that we're picking a tool that's consistent with what it is we're trying to achieve. And too often that's where people, especially new to analytics, run into issues, is they fall back on something like linear regression because it's familiar to them, and And that's fine when you're doing forecasting with a continuous valued outcome attribute, but when you're doing a classification problem, linear regression is not a good tool. So that kind of matching is really what we need as opposed to any particular algorithm.
Great point. Yeah, and that's one of the aspects that we do in an assessment. And Tony, if you could mute again, using your laptop mic, I'm getting a bit of feedback. It sounds like you just did mute, so thank you for that. Okay, great response. And Charlene had to leave the event, but she asked a great question, and I know several of her colleagues are still with us. Her question was how to handle predictive analytic projects that are not big data. Rather than where data sets, these are problems where data sets may be smaller and incomplete. This also relates to another question from Santanu, who asks, does the unavailability of good quality data in a timely manner, can that be attributed as one of the reasons for projects to fail to launch? So let's maybe combine those together. I'll start with Tony this time, also because Tony and I were having a little bit of chat here, just based on the last poll about big data, how it should maybe be put in its own category. And one side note before I go over to Tony, if you do subscribe, or if you have subscribed to the Modeling Agency's newsletter, maybe not in the next quarterly issue, which is coming out in a week or two, but the next quarterly you'll receive a link to an article that I wrote that'll be published soon in TechTarget's Search Business Analytics, which is entitled Big Data Needs Advanced Analytics, but Analytics Doesn't Need Big Data. And that speaks to this issue a little bit, but I'd like to get more from the experts here around data size, data complexity, as it relates to analytics. What about if it's not big data? And I think what we'll find is that working with big data is similar in many ways to working with any other data when it comes to analysis. It has to do with properly defining the project, as Tony's emphasized, and properly sampling the data to support it. So let's start with Tony around handling projects that are not big data, and then Santanu's question around what about when you don't have good quality data or a lack of it?
Yes, and I think that big data has gotten a lot of attention. For me, big data is not a new issue. We've been dealing with big data for at least 50 years. My simple definition of big data is I've got more data than I know what to do with. And that's the issue that we're really running into today, is we've got all these sources of additional data, and we're collecting it and organizing it and trying to figure out how to use it effectively in our decision processes. This is the issue that we have seriously dealt with for 50 years, even going back, trying to figure out how to make the math work, what the business questions are. And a lot of organizations haven't figured out yet how to deal with small data. I'm very much in a lot of my projects, I would say the vast majority of my projects, I'm only using about 5,000 records to develop my training data set. I don't need huge amounts of data. I'm more interested in the number of fields that are available, not the number of records. My interest falls more into what I refer to as stat data, where I get the complexity of multiple attributes, not a huge number of records. On the other hand, on the quality issue, obviously the better the quality of our data, as it relates to the behavior that we're modeling, the more effective we can be. But our data is what it is, and we are not in a position to wait for the highest quality of data. What I think the real issue there, and the recommendation that I would make around that, is to clean up your data to the point that you can generally, but don't do anything exceptional in your model development effort that you can't replicate in the live environment. I've seen too many organizations go through and really clean up their data in a way that's not sustainable when they go into a live environment. If you've got dirty data, work on cleaning it up, but do your modeling in the environment that the model is going to be expected to perform in.
Absolutely. Phenomenal considerations. We see it too often where, and it's a natural tendency for a lot of data scientists who are a little more tactically focused to want to start in with software and data and not look at the overall environment and, how's it going to operate when it's ultimately built. And before I go over to Scott for his perspective on this, I love your notion on the fallacy of big data. Did you want to take, we had a slide during the intro as people were coming into the room about the fallacy of big data. Do you want to take a moment on that?
I'm not sure who you were talking to, Eric, Scott, or
Oh, to you, Tony. You had a you have a saying about the fallacy of big data. I think it's along the lines of the more data you have.
Well, yeah, and when you get data, additional records do one of two things. They either enhance your precision or give you the potential to get enhanced precision because we're interpolating between points that are closer together, or we're actually hurting our performance. And we hurt our performance because of the inconsistency of human behavior. And when we add additional records, we end up capturing more of the inconsistency than we do additional information content.
Exactly. No, that's a great point. Scott, what would you like to add? And Scott, this time I don't have you muted.
You got me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Well, there were two parts to the question. One had to do with how do we promote, I believe, smaller data projects, and the other one had to do with quality of the data. I'll start with the first one. Just to summarize and underscore what Tony's already said, bigger's not better. It could be, it couldn't be. That's part of the lead into the second part. If you, I'll give you a dirty little secret of our industry. And that dirty little secret is, if you look at our industry from the outside, everybody thinks it's all about the algorithm. Certainly, without question, the algorithm is important. But the difference between a great modeler and a so-so or a failure of a modeler has to do with data preparation. Once if you've got your objectives and your problems set up correctly, most of your time will be spent upon examining your data and preparing your data, and that's where the data quality issues come in. It's a given. You know, I've been doing this for over 30 years, and there's no such thing as a clean data set. It just doesn't exist. It doesn't exist at all anywhere. So all data is dirty. It's up to you as the analyst, as the modeler, to the extent of that dirtiness, and there are prescribed things that you can do to help improve the accuracy of that data. So you've got to know your data, and you've got to know its limitations in order to apply it correctly.
A great point. And I've had trouble getting my mind around. I've heard a new term coming around called big data analytics. And I would think really the main place that big data comes into play for analytics is really in the sampling phase and to some extent the preparation. Once that's prepared, the model build and certainly deploying the model, I think downstream is pretty much the same. I'd open it up to either of you to argue that differently. But the model build, if there's any place that's computationally intensive, it's the model build stage. But that can be tamed simply by proper selection of the data to be put into the model, making sure that it adequately represents the entire solution space. And then once the model's deployed, that's typically very efficient, where it's a set of multipliers that should be very efficient to put into production, even for those that need live decisioning. Any additional comments? I think, Scott, I may have heard you ready for a response.
Well, there's a couple of things I would enhance upon when it comes to that. I get asked that question myself. Tell me about big data analytics, and the way I answer it most succinctly is predictive analytics. All predictive analytics is data analytics, but not all data analytics is predictive analytics. In other words, you can do analytics on big data that has nothing to do with predictive modeling. You can count, you can sort, you can sift, you can do all kinds of things that have nothing to do or without outside the scope of predictive analytics. So they're not necessarily the same. They overlap, but predictive analytics is a subset of a bigger umbrella that's called data analytics in general, whether it's on big data or smaller data. There are a few algorithms and you have to learn the rules first in order to learn where you can bend them or break them. As Tony likes to say, we learn how to cheat, and as long as it gives us an incremental benefit, it's okay to cheat, because the goal is the goal, and as long as it's legitimate and it works, that's what you're out to accomplish. There are some algorithms where you work with big data and you don't necessarily sample. You work on the entire data set. What comes to mind is a classification type of thing. Sometimes you may sample, sometimes you're not, but that's generally within the purview of predictive analytics. That's generally an exception rather than a rule. So you have to get a good foundation and knowledge of the techniques, the process, and most especially the business side of it, before you can learn how to break those rules or bend the rules for benefit.
We can tell you work in the predictive field, Scott, because you were answering a question as it came in live from David, who was asking, can you speak to the basic or general differences between modeling with big data versus traditional data warehousing and relational modeling? Now, I think that splits into one other practice, which I would put outside the scope of even traditional analytics or predictive analytics, which is relational modeling. I think that has to do more with what people call data modeling, which is to do more with the structure of the metadata, or how data warehousing or data is stored and established and contained, which is outside of our scope. But when it comes to traditional versus predictive, I think you've addressed that to some extent. So David, if there's more you want expressed on that, do let me know. So David had a follow-up. I'm not sure I'm clear on what is meant by predictive modeling and what processes are involved in its development. Tony, I think it's your turn. I'm going to take this over to you, and I'm going to put a couple of questions in a blender, and I know this gets a little difficult to respond to, but in the spirit of time, because we're at the end of the 90 minutes, did want to come back to Santanu's question about the data quality, which Scott answered very effectively. But I have one other thing to add there. Does the unavailability of good quality data in a timely manner, can that be attributed to failure? And one thing I wanted to impress upon, and Scott said all data is dirty, but is you may have heard the phrase of, the common phrase of garbage in, garbage out. And you might be surprised that a lot of these machine learning algorithms are very fault tolerant. You might find that not having good quality data doesn't have as much impact as you'd think. It does have impact, and certainly, the increase in data quality is going to have an increase in performance. But it's far more important to ensure that the problem definition is established properly, and that's where we can make our car run faster, but if it's 40% off course, you know what happens. And so that's a couple of comments on that. And Tony, I'm sorry to send this over to you with a couple of semi-unrelated questions here, but pick and choose what you'd like to respond so we can kind of take a shotgun approach at wrapping up the final questions that I put kind of together in a bag here. But if there's anything else on data quality, and if you think we beat that up enough, that's fine. And then David asks about what processes are involved in predictive modeling development as opposed to, say, traditional analysis on data warehousing versus big data.
Okay, I'm throwing a whole bunch of questions and answers into one bag here all at once. Going back to including the last question, and I just want to make a brief response on, especially for people that are relatively new to this field, understand that big data, predictive analytics, data mining, big data analytics, the whole field is constantly being reinvented by marketing departments so they can sell more software. This is the same set of tools, the same approaches that we've been using for 25 or 30 years or more. We get the same algorithms for the most part. We're thinking about the problems differently. We're approaching it differently, and we're trying to actually apply these technologies to business problems. We do have to, it's not magic, it's math. Going back to the data issue and availability, there are 5 criteria for doing these kinds of projects. We need a business objective. We need performance metrics to measure the level that our models are doing what we need them to do in our decision processes. We have a behavior that we're modeling. We allocate scarce resources. That's what the business gets. The easiest way to enhance business performance is to do a better job of spending the time and money that's available and budgeted to the decisions that we're making, and we need sufficient data. If we don't have enough data, then yes, we have a problem. And it's not saying we can't do anything with it. It's saying we can't do predictive analytics with it. Predictive analytics is not a cure-all. It's good potentially when we meet all 5 of those criteria. It's an approach to analytics. Sometimes we do have missing data, and around the issue of data organization, I think that's a lot of what we've seen with the big data hype cycle that we've been going through, is that a lot of organizations have restructured their data, moving away from relational fields, largely because, as Scott was mentioning, the data prep is a lot of work and a major effort, and relational organizations of our data are not necessarily the best environment for handling large quantities of data in an analytic environment, and going into more of a flat file or a different type of data organization may be a better approach for organizations that are making a widespread adoption of analytics inside of their organizations. And the last point I want to make real quickly is I'm actually very happy to see big data analytics being broken out separately, because one of the issues that I've had with the whole big data movement is the idea that it included both the IT perspective and the analytic perspective, and they are 2 different worlds with 2 sets of considerations. But what makes it predictive? Realistically, the only thing that makes it predictive is that when we set up our training data set, we have to associate a future outcome with the current set of conditions, and most of our data is not stored that way. We go through and we've got the current set of conditions and the current outcome on what actually happened on this mailing. The person looked like this, not whether or not they bought on the next mailing. And we need that lag so that our outcome is a future event associated with the current.
Oh, Tony, I think we lost your audio, and you're on your way to, I mean, you were doing a phenomenal job of handling a big mixed bag and pretty much hitting every point. It sounds like you're back? No, maybe not. And I know Tony had to change his audio settings after his core presentation. So I think it sounded like Tony was summarizing on that anyway. And I think, David, hopefully that helped to distinguish around the predictive analytics process that you were asking about. And I wanted to hit one more question from Kim, who actually does have a training application in process for the Denver production. It's a phenomenal question: how to get change in the culture, in the organizational culture, so that there's buy-in on the analytical program. And good point. If you don't have buy-in from the top, it's really hard to get analytics to perform more than just for the sake of analytics, and really making an impact for organizational performance. So the 2 things that I can think of off the bat would be an on-site executive level presentation as to the capabilities, the risks, and some case-supported rewards being presented of analytics when everything's done properly. Is kind of a summary of how as well as a competitive summary of the landscape that's leveraging analytics. Because if there's one thing that's going to get leadership to take action, is to be concerned that they're falling behind because they're not leveraging a very effective technology that their competition is. And oftentimes a little bit of research can show, I think you'll find pretty quickly, that your direct competitors are finding ways to leverage at least data analytics, and a few who are making great strides with predictive analytics. The main challenge there being that many of them, and this is where we have difficulty just coming up with case studies we can publish, many of them are secretive about the substantial gains that they get with predictive analytics. And we do have some of those, but we have to cleanse them to some extent. And each client has their own rules around what we can share. But we do have a number of those, and I think they were shown in more detail in previous versions of Failure to Launch. I think we might have taken some of those out. If you have any interest in them, feel free to email me directly. I think you may have had my email credentials from some of the interactions from the registration. So the one is an executive level presentation from a presenter who can really speak executive language. Of course, we have that at the modeling agency. That's our specialty, is being able to change our language based upon who our audience is, and being able to engage in language that executives can understand around analytics. Why should they be applied? What are the benefits that that you can enjoy when it's deployed properly? What are the risks, not only when it's undertaken improperly, but what are the risks of not going forward with analytics or waiting? What are the potential costs are some of the things. And the other is to engage an expert to assist with a pilot internally. And I wouldn't even publish it yet internally, but produce the pilot, again with the proper project definition. That's where a seasoned strategic analytic consultant can help to establish the project the right way, roadmap a lot of the data transformations and preparation, ensure with that the model results will be interpreted in a way or translated in a way that's going to be impactful for leadership, so that when it is presented, it's going to have it's going to send a message of this is where we need to be and where we need to move. Once that's established, then you can look out to the broader effort of establishing a practice, so that we're not just building ad hoc individual models that present some nice-to-know insights, but that we have a predictive modeling factory that can churn out very efficiently models that will hit goal-directed results that translate and measure impact to the organization. That's how you establish a far more productive analytic practice. Scott, anything to add to any other advice for Kim about changing the culture, either with leadership and a lot of times traditional analysts are nervous about making a shift or letting go of the handlebars of the methods that they're so used to, or giving up some explainability for accuracy, or vice versa. Any other advice about this change of mindset within the organization, how to handle it?
Well, certainly what you're suggesting is the best route to go. To expand on it just slightly, from a tactical perspective, what you really want to wind up doing is showing a proof of concept. You go out and you build a model. You don't have to implement the model. But you decide where your lowest hanging fruit is and where your greatest chances of success are that would have the most significant impact, and that's easiest to do. And you actually build a model. You don't have to implement it, but you train the model, you test it, you validate it, and then you show those who are in charge what could possibly be. There's nothing like actual results that can change the mindset of an executive. If they see then you don't have to go out and implement it immediately. You certainly can go out and test it to see that the model is actually performing as it says it might work. Most often they won't perform exactly the way that the training, testing, and validation suggests, but you will get an incremental lift, and that incremental lift generally translates into bottom line impact. So the objective of this whole process is to actually get a model built so you can show them a what-if scenario.
Oh, that's great considerations around that, and a great extension to what I was expressing. Tony, it looks like your audio is reconnected. Anything you'd like to summarize around culture change mindset?
Yes, I'd like to take a little bit different perspective on this and suggest that maybe it's time you stop worrying about organizational adoption and just work with the decision maker. Or if you are a decision maker, you have data and you have a computer, just go build a model and make better decisions and let people ask you what you did. Let them come to you. We don't need organizational adoption. These are not software solutions. These are business problems, and we need to start working with business decision makers and involve them in the process and actively support making better decisions that give higher levels of performance in a significant way, one by one. And you do that with 2 or 3 people in an organization, and the rest of the organization is going to notice.
Yeah, a top-down approach, hard to miss with that. And instead of being a technology looking for a home, and those usually don't take off. It's a very succinct way to wrap it up. And I have one other quote that came in from Brad, which is a phenomenal summary to this, and I thank you for that, Brad. He said behavior needs to be observable in the data, and he says, per Einstein, not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that can be counted counts. That's phenomenal. That's going to go into, well, Brad, if that were your quote directly, I'd have to ask for permission. I think since it's Einstein's, we'll give a proper attribution. I think that's going to have to go into one of our leading slides and perhaps as a quote in the courseware. That's fantastic, and we thank you for that. But at 45 minutes past the hour, and still with about half the participants with us, 15 minutes over, on an hour-and-a-half webinar, we'd better draw this event to a close. I'd certainly like to thank our attendees today for your sustained interest and your active participation. You were phenomenal in the polls, as well as Scott and Tony for your great segments and, of course, your valuable and sometimes entertaining Q&A contributions. We'll follow up with an email shortly with some resources and suggestions that will hopefully be useful to you. From there, we'll hope you've already offered permission for us to stay in touch with the Modeling Agency's quarterly newsletter, and that you'll consider joining us at a public training event soon. Remember to act quickly to reserve your space in the July 14th Denver Predictive Analytics and Data Mining course series. It's just a month away, and the registration time frame is within the next 2 weeks. And note that you can apply the 20% very early bird discount for the September 15th production in Washington, D.C. if you register by Monday, July 7th. Now, if you would like to benefit from your early efforts instead of just reducing the bill for your organization, we can hand you up to $200 in Visa gift cards at the course instead for your own personal use. You can select which discount you'd like to receive in the online registration form. And don't forget that your colleagues can join you anytime for up to 30% off. Now, if you don't have a training or travel budget but would like the guidance of a seasoned mentor, you might be interested in the Modeling Agency's Wire Support program. Wire Support is essentially a retainer account that provides remote open access to a TMA senior consultant like Scott or Tony. Simply open up a Wire Support account, and you've instantly added a wealth of experience and capability to your existing bench without expanding payroll, administrating complicated contracts, or taking elevated risk on larger commitments. We'll get you the answers you want, guide you through it, show you how it's done, implement any data mining tasks you may wish to delegate, and then remain on call until the next time you need us. And meanwhile, when we're not actively working, you're not paying a dime. So a link to the Wire Support description page will be among the resources included in the follow-up email. On behalf of myself, Tony, and Scott, thank you again for attending Data Mining Failure to Launch. Have a very pleasant afternoon, and this brings the webinar broadcast to a close.